Hey guys, this is Robert Wasman. I'm your friendly neighborhood bud tender, and I'm down here with David Bailey from Dope Magazine. What is up, man?
How's it going, bud?
Oh, living the dream. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself. Your history. You're a grower. You're an entrepreneur. You're an editor at a magazine. How'd you get there?
Yeah, so I guess I started growing back in college when I was in another state, and after leaving there and going to Colorado, started growing in a dispensary and ended up being a pretty big one there. I learned a lot from the head grower there, and obviously did a whole lot of home growing kind of along the way that got me into that position up until that point. Kind of had to adapt and shift a lot of home grows and apartments and ventilation situations and make sure apartment management didn't know, or landlords, whatever that shit. So did a lot of that for a long time, and then so I kind of moved up from there. Then when I came to Washington, started being the grow writer for Dope Magazine. Was the head grower for a couple different operations, consulted, was the manager for Lucid for a while, the retail stores, and then now the editor at Dope Magazine, and start my own grow license right now. So
awesome, man. That's great. So the reason I wanted to have you for this this interview is because you helped me learn how to grow. You know what I mean? Other people did too, but you were the one that helped me like refine what I'm doing. And in this episode, we're talking, about grows for, the consumer, not necessarily the commercial side of the grow. So let's just assume I don't know what I'm doing. What would you suggest to me to start my grow?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to when you didn't know what you were doing. It's been a while, man. You've been growing for a minute now. Gully, I mean, starting out, there's so many different directions. That's the hard thing. So, reading and researching seems like a little overwhelming, I think, because there are so many different directions. It's like, do I do hydro? Do I do soil? What type of lighting do I need? That's probably the hardest part. And so honestly, you just need to pick a route. You just need to choose a direction. I think some of the easiest ways to go are just the most old school method, if you can just do it in soil, because it gives you a little bit of a pH buffer. Also just with your nutrients, a little bit of buffer to zone there. And then stick with just either sunlight if you can, or your HPS bulbs or whatever. Okay. There's a lot of options around LED and all these things, but
so basically you'd have to pick a route, and I think a lot of that would also depend on like what your budget is. Soil it's more expensive on the long run, but in the short term it's cheaper. I would say that hydro is maybe a little bit more cost intensive in the beginning. Yeah. But over time, it tends to pay for itself. Those would be types of things that you would tell the initial grower to think about before they decided which route they were going to go?
I mean, really, I think it's for the novice grower, for the home grower, it's about your space. It's about what you can work with. I mean, more than anything, that's going to be your limiting factor.
Okay.
So do you have a lot of head space? Like, if you don't have a lot of head space, setting up a hydro operation isn't going to be to your benefit necessarily, because a novice grower will always over-veg. Which is okay.
Yeah.
It's a good learning thing to be able to see how it grows and nodes out and everything, but that causes really tall, lanky plants. They're going to take up a lot of fucking space. Everybody does it. It's okay. But dealing with that, like, you don't want to have a hydro system that's 4 foot off the ground. Now you've only got 5 foot of head space, and you've got your fan and your lamp and everything else up above it.
Yeah.
That's a bitch.
Yeah, and then your plants are running into your lights and...
And that's a problem, you don't want to deal with it as an early, because even fire is always a realistic hazard, right? I mean, you're trying to burn your fucking house down. It's a really bad way to hydro grow, a really bad way.
So cost, space, these are things that you would have to take into effect.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's say I'm choosing soil, right? I'm going to go with soil. What nutrients and kind of cycles do you think would be best for someone in a small apartment-sized grow going on soil?
Yeah. I mean, I think for like nutrients, like that's always kind of a personal choice. There certainly is like a fiscal benefit if you're going to doing something with your product, or trying to get the largest amount of yield per square foot with agrochemicals. There's something to be said there. However, I think for the home grower, like, you have the capability to really. I think the best pot is grown in small spaces.
Yeah.
Period. I really do. You have the most control, you have the most ability to tweak every little scenario and pay attention to each individual plant. You can't do that in to the same ability on a large scale. It's just not possible. So because of that, like, nutrient-wise, I think it's nice to use like an organic base if you can. You get a lot sweeter product at the end. You can get comparable yields after time.
Okay, so you're saying that you could go with your normal like store-bought chemical nutrients, you know what I mean? Or you could go with organics. Now, that's something that you taught me a little bit about. You know, I haven't got into it yet. I was still trying to perfect actually growing the pot first. But you know, you were telling me about like bacteria soups, using simple things like bananas and leftover food, and then fostering certain bacteria. Tell us a little bit about that on a small scale.
Yeah, on a small scale. So I mean, like composting, I guess it kind of all comes back to this mentality of composting. So composting isn't just this single format of like having only X amount of vegetables that you can utilize, and it always has to be aerated and turned. There's also anaerobic composting. So that's going to mean it doesn't utilize oxygen. And so there's a lot of natural ways that happens in our gut, for instance. Lactobacillus is the main bacteria. It's actually the bacteria you primarily use in bokashi composting.
Okay.
So in bokashi composting, you can take actually meats, all the harder, more grainy substances that wouldn't typically, it would take years potentially, and regular compost go down in weeks or months. I mean, the biggest thing is being able to add meats and all types of rancid things, lime zest, lemon zest, all those things you can't add.
Yeah, they tell you not to put in a normal compost. Yeah.
That's it. You can add all that. So more or less starting with that as your mentality, learning about that, understanding how those bacteria are functioning, that's the same way that your soil works. And then you have to understand how your plants are actually interacting with those bacteria to pull up nutrients. Because naturally, so like in your yard or whatever, things aren't growing because there's, well, there are small amounts of like free ammonia floating around, but it's not the primary base, right? Yeah. So most things are interacting with soil bacteria, which are breaking down organic substances, and there's another organism that is then transferring that substance that attaches to the rhizosphere, to the root base, more or less, right? It converts that energy into a usable form. And the plants are actually, even to some extent, because they're expressing a need by it transitions the type of bacteria, the pH of these things, that then transitions a need for that nutritional supplement to that area. So the plants can actually more or less kind of call for what they're needing and what they want.
So a symbiotic relationship between the bacteria and the roots of the plant.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Awesome. And you foster that by adding in these, you know, the meats and but you
so that's just bokashi
compost,
right? Yeah, so this is like in your house. So like that's taking all the scraps.
Okay.
So taking that boom back to the garden. So you have the final matter that actually, you know, you're still going to be looking at about 6 months, but that's you're looking at 2 years before you've got a really usable compost that's fully humused.
Yeah.
Whereas like with this, 6 months is really fucking fast. So you can utilize that as an addition to your soil medium. It's going to be a really, really, really rich nutritional addition to your soil blend. But in addition to that, you can actually use the juice that's coming off that, and that goes into your feeding blends. So back to the bacterial teas, you kind of opened up a big can of worms. With the bacterial teas, you're doing aerobic. So you're having an air stone in the bottom of a bucket. And what that's doing is it's either making the bacteria dormant or it's killing it off.
Okay.
So a lot of the pathogenic bacteria is going to die in an aerobic environment and or go dormant and not continue to multiply. So it'll just falls off, right? Whereas your beneficial, it's largely saying beneficial bacteria are going to multiply vastly. So all that's in there typically is going to be a little bit of compost from your bokashi or from worm castings or both ideally.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be brewing that potentially with some molasses. There's a lot of kind of movement away from that even now where you're just doing like fish emulsions or just letting it just sit longer and brewing for just longer periods of time. A lot of different methods there for different reasons, results. You can put yucca in. A lot of different. I mean, it gets.
Yeah.
You know,
so
it's a tricky method.
Why would this be beneficial for the grower? Like, I mean, besides just knowing the information and it being fun, I mean, does this help foster better growth or nug structure or terpenes? I mean, is there anything in particular that would be beneficial for the end result?
Yeah, so I mean, terpenes I think would be a distinct thing. So your terpenes and your flavonoids are going to be substantially higher. Your overall nutritional content of the product, especially if you're using this as an edible or food product, is substantially higher, and that's been demonstrated just in tests of like organic foods versus conventionally grown, which is kind of funny because this is only the past 50 years we've never grown fucking vegetables this way, but conventionally grown agriculture products. I mean, we're looking at results as much as, like 100-200% increase in like magnesium and iron, calcium, things like that. So the same kind of happens in cannabis, and for that same reason, also your antioxidants are substantially higher. So your vitamin C, vitamin A, cannabinoids themselves are antioxidants.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anyway, continue.
Cannabinoids are some of the most potent antioxidants known to mankind.
Nice.
Yeah. Per weight, per gram, they're phenomenal. Each has their own, different.
Well, that makes
value,
sense. It has a lot of protective abilities, processes, and our biggest thing as humans is being oxidized and dying.
Mm-hmm.
that is the aging process, is us getting oxidized. But okay, so terpenes, that makes sense that you would find more terpene production in organically natural means than you would in unnatural means. I don't want to say unnatural in the bad name.
Yeah, I just think chemical. I think is just the easiest way to kind of put it. But yeah, I mean, so the main reason that is the complexity, the variety in which the plant is interacting with things. So you just get a more complex. Often, we have not seen this conclusively, but it's often said by people who consume it that you get a more complex terpene profile. You get a more complex cannabinoid profile. Everything's a little bit more varied, a little bit more intense, if you will, because of the organics. It's definitely a sweeter, tastier flower. If it were for the money, honestly, looking at just economically, I'd be only growing chemically, period. Because you definitely, it's easier. That's for goddamn sure, and it's faster. To some extent, if you've really honed in the ultimate organic game, you can be, I would say, comparable, right?
Yeah.
But it's not as easily. A novice grower with a fucking chemical nutrient regimen can be getting 1.5 pounds, potentially even 2 pounds of yield, a lamp yield. If we're going by old school kind of home grow, thoughts. Say that because now you would go by grams per foot or grams per meter now, But yeah, just kind of go back on that old aesthetic. That's kind of what you're aiming for, and you can absolutely get that as a novice grower. I remember easily getting 2 pounds of lamp in some of my first grows.
Yeah.
At home, no problem.
I see what you're saying with going with that route, but it would be easier for the average grower, especially the new grower, to go the chemical route, at least until they learn the kind of techniques that they want to grow. Now, let's talk about, we have it.
I think maybe the best in-between, honestly, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, go ahead.
I think maybe the best kind of in-between there is actually to go with your pre-bottled organic, your OMRI certified nutrients. So those are things that are still utilized in growing, your organic grown vegetables. They've made it a lot simpler for a lot of large-scale farmers, things like that, Botanicare, companies like that. And they're, a pretty quality product. However, it's not truly organic. It is...
borderline.
It's kind of it's kind of a hybrid situation, but it is organic certified enough that it's mainly organic. I think that's kind of a nice in between to start because you get the simplicity of and the benefits in many respects. If you're using Canna or you're using there's so many fucking I said Botanicare, all those different Earth Juice, all those different companies. You're going to get pretty similar yields to one another, and you're going to be able to just follow a recipe. And so you still get to learn the basics of what it means to pay attention to your ppms, which is not really as useful with those particular nutrients. They'll stay pretty low, seemingly. But your pH balance, certainly your nutritional uptake, your daily, your soil tension, your light, your growth per day, all of that. That's all going to be something you need to learn those basics. You need to harden those basics down, really solidly before you, I think, dive into trying to figure out the rhizosphere and understanding the basis and the interaction between all these different yeast and bacteria with the soil. I think that's a kind of a safe spot to start, right?
Understand the ecosystem before you try to understand the micro ecosystem going on inside of it. Yeah, I feel it.
Get the basics done, you know what I mean?
So let's assume, I went soil. I decided to go with the middle ground, where I'm only just putting in a certain millimeter per gallon into a thing, and I'm kind of following a schedule. So what would you think would be best for the actual technique of growing itself? Would you recommend them topping for their first time grow? Would you recommend them mollypopping, or would just bushing it out? What would you recommend as far as that's concerned?
I think that there's again in your space and how many plants you have. I think in my early days how many clones survived. Was a big part of that. So it's I had planned on having maybe these 9 plants in this space, but I ended up with 4 or something of the sort. Or they ended up with males because I'm popping random seeds I got from some random sack. You know, so I mean, like a lot of that it comes from that. Usually you're going to end up with less and you end up with more. So in that respect, I think it's good to veg them out a little longer in the beginning because you're going to make that mistake anyway. So if you have the space, go less plants. It also lowers, you know, you're not someplace where it's legal. Lowers any incidence of or lowers the time you'll be spending at least.
Yeah, at least that.
At least that. You know, keep your numbers low, 1 to 2 plants. You can still get the same amount of weed off that amount of square footage. You have to grow it out a lot longer. That's what I think isn't often realized is that, you know, people talk about like pounds per lamp, pounds per meter, whatever, and they're like, oh, well, how big are you going to your plants? And it's like, well, it's more about like how many plants for how long. So like if I'm only vegging them for 4 weeks, like, well, I mean, if I'm veg, that's actually a pretty good chunk of veg time. If I'm vegging them for 4 weeks, like I'm probably only going to do like 4 plants in a 5x5, say, or 4x4 space, right?
Yeah.
Like, whereas if I'm vegging them for 1 week, I'm going to have 9 plants in there. You know, if I'm not vegging them all, I'm taking them right out of clone, and if I can slapping them in there, I may run fucking, a lot, right?
Yeah.
36 or more plants per single lamp.
Yeah, because I myself, we slowly worked our way down from a 12-week cycle to a 10-week cycle to a 9-week cycle. You know, and right now I'm finding the 9-week cycle is the sweet spot for me as a grower.
As on a veg cycle, you mean? Like 9 weeks of veg or 9 weeks?
No, total.
So just 1 week of veg?
Well, when we were at 12, we were doing like, I think the 3 weeks of veg. Then we took out a week of veg and we dropped ourselves down to 10, you know, and then we took out a week of veg and we dropped ourselves down to 10.
Smaller plants.
Yeah, and what we realized is like, you know, and this is real world experience here happening, you know, is like, we our first harvest, you remember, were huge freaking plants. They were ridiculously large bushes of
with no weed on them.
With like no weed on them, you know, and we produced maybe like a QP.
Yeah.
Right.
And you had some serious trees. Like it was really humorous to me, like kind of seeing how they came to. I mean, I felt bad, but sometimes like I had to laugh because I'm like, dude, like each one of those easily could have been half-pound plants.
Yeah.
Easily 3/4. I mean, if you'd really been pushing them. And like, yeah, you guys get like 1/4 pound off of like fucking like 5 plants.
5 huge plants.
It was crazy.
But this next go around, same amount of plants.
Yeah.
Right? No taller than this by the time we harvested. You know what I mean? But between the lollipopping and really topping them and getting them out, they were
dicks.
Yeah, they were huge and they were great and they were perfect for what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, so I definitely have to agree with you as far as, you know, if you're going to do this, you have to assess what you're able to do in the first place. So
I think less plants is just easier to manage in the beginning, like watering 2 pots versus watering 9 pots.
Yeah.
You know, playing with air movement and like even watering and maintaining even like runoff and other things. It's just a lot. It's just more difficult. The more plants you add, it's just more complexity.
Yeah.
Right. So just keep it simple. I think is the best thing to do in the beginning.
So, all right, so going back, let's assume that, you know, I went soil, we're doing the middle organic, I'm only going with like 3 plants. With like a small number of 3, right, for a 5x5 space, how would you prune those, or how would you train those plants as they grow?
I mean, you're probably looking at, you know, with only 3 plants in a 5x5 space, you're probably looking at a solid, 6 weeks of veg for a beginner because you're, you know, there are definitely people who can grow it and do it in 4 weeks and pound it out and get that same yield. You know, and there's been strains and times when I've been able to do that. But I would say in the beginning, like, don't count on that. Look at 6 to 8 weeks of veg time. Like, that's not uncommon for larger tree-style plants. And that's what you're kind of going to need to fill them out. I think the best thing to do, I guess, like, I'm trying to think of the terms, like lollipop and all that shit, like, it's more so just pruning to your space, right? So you definitely want an even canopy, period.
Okay.
That's always going to be the case. You're never going to be better off having like a tree, because like you've got these different level, like your lamp loses intensity on an inverse. Period.
Yeah.
Those are just the facts.
Exponentially so, too.
Exponentially. It's on the inverse. That's it. And so like you don't want to do that. Just don't waste your time. Don't waste your space with that. If you can canopy, if you can level out your canopy. You're now seeing kind of a standardized, like on the large scale industry, you know, outside of the home, you're seeing very much that standard. right? Like finally, like what I had been doing in Colorado, fucking at this point, like 5 years ago, is coming around to being done here on like the daily and most
That
of these large
sea
places.
green level
That's
playing field kind
Now,
of
everybody's
thing.
got different sized plants.
Yeah.
You've still got people who've got 8-week veg. You've got people who've got 2-week veg. You've got it all in between. But everybody's recognized that in terms of like the light to canopy ratio, there's fucking facts. Right? Like there's some basic science there.
Yeah.
Like there's no arguments, not nutrients, none of that bullshit. Like the science is the fucking science, and like you're losing money if you're letting that light drop on the floor.
Yeah.
You know.
You're not wrong. And so, okay, so you're saying regardless of how you train the plant, what you're going to want to keep is
It's
an
a
even
flat,
canopy,
Even canopy.
across. Good ways to achieve that trellising,
I think
topping,
Yeah.
stuff like that, or even low level stress where you push down on the plant or do you taught me this thing where you like pinch
Yeah. You
The-
pinch
the-
and bend it.
pinch and bend so you're not hurting or killing the plant, but you're stressing it out.
That's it. Yeah, it kind of depends on what type of time you're dealing with. I'm both working with plants at home. I think it's useful to go ahead and do low stress training. You understand how the plant grows and responds and bends. More or less, you pinch it so that it breaks apart the minor parts. I can't remember exactly what the minor parts of the cell there, like the stalk.
Okay.
But the softer parts, and you have the harder parts that are still intact. And so what it does is it allows it to bend over. Like you can bend it down without shredding or breaking any of those harder fibers. And so it still stays intact and it bends out and then it just curves back up.
Yep.
And then you get a strengthened stalk there. It also changes the hormonal flow though less drastically than cutting it, to the lower branches. So you still get the same lateral branching growth and movement from that. You still get all the benefits, but without the aggressive topping. However, there's something to be said with the aggressive hormonal flow that changes whenever you top.
Yeah.
Whenever you do a solid top on a plant that's just been growing on a single straight, conical root, and you just nick it, especially take off the good 6-inch top, you'll see it turn into the perfect Hanukkah tree, you know what I'm saying, real quick.
Right. That's awesome. So, okay. In our hypothetical, we have about 3 plants in a 5x5 space. We're going with soil, semi-organic. We're using HPS. And we're keeping our level canopy. Harvesting. Any tips? You said usually typically 1 to 2 weeks is how long you should flush.
1 to 2 weeks. The biggest thing is just checking the ppms on the runoff. You want to make sure that you're cleaning the plant out, right? Like, you can't actually strip anything. Plants are utilizing the nutrients that are available in there. The idea is to pull away any extra nutrients so that they can utilize what they already have.
Yeah.
That way you don't get any residual chemical taste in the end. Even from organic nutrients, like too much nitrogen just leaves a grassy flavor. Takes a much longer time to cure.
It's where you get that hay flavor from, kind of.
Yeah, every flower is going to have a slight amount of kind of grassiness when you first harvest, just because there is a nitrogen release. It's definitely still holding some nitrogen in there. But yeah, it shouldn't smell like fucking hay for like a week or two. That's not good. That's not a good sign at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
The flush is really important, like right towards the end, mainly for the chemical runoff and for the if you're looking at it as like a medicine. Nitrogen causes problems in eating high nitrogen foods.
Okay.
For your body, especially if you're on like a ketogenic diet or things like that. If you have like cancer and all those types of things, you don't want to be eating a large amount of nitrogen. And other things that make like fermented foods. It's also not good. It causes it interrupts the process of the yeast. So high nitrogen is not good for us to consume, although obviously it's good for plants.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there.
You gotta have the plant. The plant needs it, but at the same time, you don't. So
You're going to be eating a whole bunch of nitrogen. So there's definitely a balance level there. So then that's part of why you want to flush your plants, especially on the medicinal side. And it's going to make better tasting weed. I mean, at the end of the day, like you gotta smoke it or cook with it or whatever. Like you want it to taste good, you want it to smell good, like you want it to be good.
You want, you don't want the old school like smells like hay, tastes like hay.
You just put 2 months worth of effort into this, and Lord knows what amount of money.
Yeah.
Don't fuck it off in the last.
You don't brew your own beer to brew crap.
No,
you don't grow your own weed to grow crap.
That's it.
So okay, so we're flushed. We're good. Like, any tips on how to harvest? Like,
totally. I mean, harvesting fucked with me so bad in the beginning because there's no. Well, okay, now that there's so much legalization about, there's a lot more books, manuals. I encourage you to look them up. My advice would be to get all your fan leaves off before you do anything with any other part of the plant. Even necessarily before you maybe pull off the trellising. The trellising is going to be weaved inside out some of the buds a lot of the time because they've grown there over them. Fan leaves can kind of block that, and you'll end up like tearing some shit up sometimes. And you're pulling trellising off, which is it's not the worst thing. You're about to cut them up anyway.
Yeah.
However, like you can fuck up a really pretty nug, which isn't cool. It's not what you're trying to do.
Can't take a picture of a broken nug,
No,
man.
it's a lot less flattering. That's for damn sure. So yeah, strip all your fan leaves, and then obviously go and take your trellising off. I suggest trellising or some form of something to hold them up. I mean, if you're feeding them right, those fuckers should not be standing up on their own.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the reality, unless it's outdoor. And even then,
No, even then I see people put trellising over the entirety of the plant.
Trellising outdoors as well. I've never had a positive outcome not using it. So, I mean, it is what it is there.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely strip it down, get all the fan leaves off. If you're going to trim on the branch, then obviously, take off each branch. If you're going to trim by the nug, like I personally prefer to do that and to dry it on nets and stuff. That's been the style that I've just become accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
Also largely because I use like an auto trimmer and then do hand trimming afterwards for the
Yeah.
sake of efficiency. So a lot of times that's why I've used that. But I mean, if you're going to do the stem, I definitely make sure that you don't have a lot of buds that are, because the stems may be rigid and outwards like this, right? Like to begin with. But then obviously when you hang it upside down, they're going to dry towards one another. You don't want to have anything that's going to end up overlapping. So if you've got two big branches, go ahead and snip them and get them in between and hang them separate.
Okay.
So
you don't want them touching each other.
You don't want them touching.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Good air circulation. You don't want direct air. Like you don't want a fan blowing on. That's a big mistake a lot of people make is they fucking just blow a fan right on them. What happens is the outside dries really fast and the inside is really moist.
Okay, so no wind. I've gone through the whole process. I've used my organic. I'm using soil. I have a 5x5 space. Did my 3. We flushed it for 1 to 2 weeks, and then we've cut it out. We hung it. We did not put direct air on it.
Yeah.
What else? Like curing wise, what do you think as far as
keeping your room right? These are all things you can find in books, obviously, but I think the biggest thing is checking on it daily. That's where so many people go wrong, or they get too nervous. If you're a weed smoker, if you've at least been smoking for weed for a while, like even if it's like illegally, like you're getting sacks, like you know what stuff you like. Just like is it the way that you liked your favorite weed? No. If it is yes, then perfect. Like stop there, put it in a jar. Right? Like I think like keeping your humidity in your environment is crucial. A lot of people won't do that. They'll just put a fan on it or some shit. Like certainly people have been drying fucking weed in barns for centuries. Like I get it, but like it's shit quality. So
just because it works doesn't mean it's the best tactic.
So get a dehumidifier, set it at a lot of people say 60%. Like I find that to be a little hazardous, especially here in Washington State, because while a machine may be reading that, maybe it's at 65%, and you don't have direct airflow on it. There is potential, especially if you're driving in a basement or who knows. Like I say, go and drop down to 50. You're not going to completely ruin your weed, but by any extent, dropping it down to 50%, that's not going to just kill the weed. It's still going to be very fragrant, but keep an eye on it. Like check on it every day. If it's trimmed, sand trimmed, like rotate it around. If it's hanging on the stem, make sure that it's not touching or landing on anything. Or if it gently is, make sure it's like cotton or breathable, not a plastic or metal or anything like that. Something that's going to be able to like at least allow some airflow and try and rotate it daily or multiple times a day if you can. That's fucking crucial. Like, just keeping an eye on it. And if it starts to get really crunchy on the outside, but you can tell that it's not on the inside, put it in a bag. Brown paper bags are your fucking best friend. Slap it into a brown paper sack for half a day. It'll soften up again on the outside. It shouldn't be crunchy anymore. That moisture basically, it's the beginning of curing. It dissipates to the outside. That's it.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for walking us through this step. Well, for me, this is like the third time you've walked me through this process. But thanks for doing it for the listeners. Where can people find what you're doing? Where can they find out your work? Where can they read what you're writing? Where can they do all of that?
Yeah, I work for Joe Magazine's editor, so I definitely have pieces out there regularly. Actually, the October issue, I did a lot of the pieces in there, the main features. Some really exciting material in there. Some ex-NBA player, world champion kickboxers, skydivers, fun stuff coming. So,
nice.
Yeah, check that out, and then eventually you'll get to see some of my weed in the market. But that's It'll be a minute.
That's on the DL.
Yeah, I have the license, so I mean that part's in the public papers at this point.
You started
But
the race.
I've started the race with all of my limbs tied behind my back. So the dirt tastes mighty dirty.
Hey man, but hey, you're gonna make it.
No, it's good. Everything's going along at its own pace, but no, nothing's gone wrong. It's just time winding.
Awesome.
So, yep,
All right, man. Thank you so much, man, for having me up here.
no doubt, man.